Good morning. I'm Jody Trani, President of INSA. On behalf of Ambassador John Negroponte, INSA's chairman and the board, and the entire INSA leadership team, welcome to the 2015 Intelligence and National Security Summit.
And good morning. I'm Maureen Baginski, and on behalf of Lieutenant General Bob Shea, President and CEO of AFCEA International, and Vice Admiral Jake Jacoby, Chairman of the AFCEA Intelligence Committee, welcome to the Intelligence and National Security Summit 2015, the state of U.S. intelligence, plans, priorities, partnerships. And I must say, over 1,300 of you registered to attend. Woo, it's gonna be a good 2 days. For us, the summit is a very unique event. We have two organizations, INSA and AFCEA, that themselves are founded on a partnership in pursuit of national security. That's what we're about, partnership for national security. And so what we decided to do was partner ourselves and to create a forum that we could bring together everyone in an unclassified environment so that everybody who has to work together to ensure the health of U.S. intelligence can have a discussion about what's necessary to ensure that health and its strength. And those people are the government, industry, academia, the media, and of course, the American public.
That's right, Mo. That's well said. And this is the second year for the summit, and we are planning to make this an annual event. Intelligence is an essential element of U.S. national security. On that, there is no disagreement. That's why we're all here this morning. This is why intelligence has existed as an activity of the United States government since the founding of the Republic. Over the years, its structure has evolved, but its core mission has endured unchanged: to provide the decision advantage to all who act in defense of the nation. But as DNI Clapper says, the breadth and complexity of threats facing our nation has never been greater. ISIS, a resurgent Russia, seemingly daily reports of massive cyber breaches. We saw some very recent breaches that affected, I think, almost all of us in this audience. Expected implementation of a nuclear agreement with Iran, dealing with a nuclear North Korea, tension in the East and South China Seas. But these are just a few of the issues that will demand the attention of U.S. intelligence for the foreseeable future. When faced with a threat environment of such complexity, partnership is more important than ever. The solutions we need to counter these threats reside in our collective hands. We need voices and ideas from all perspectives, and the summit is designed to provide just that.
It's really well said, Joe, thank you. And in addition to the threat environment, there are other issues facing U.S. intelligence on the fiscal, technology, policy, and legal fronts. So what we've done is structure a summit agenda to explore all the dimensions of this, what Director Clapper sometimes called a perfect storm, and then to look at their effect on the state of U.S. intelligence in 5 plenary sessions and 3 very issue-specific tracks that include 9 total breakout sessions. We think we're incredibly fortunate as INSA and AFCEA to have the leaders of U.S. intelligence themselves here to discuss these issues: national intelligence, defense intelligence, homeland intelligence. They'll be here to share their assessment of the state of their areas of intelligence responsibility and their priorities, plans, and partnerships for the future. We think we're equally fortunate that leaders from congressional oversight committees, specifically the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, will be here to do the same. To us, the fact that all these leaders would devote their time to this event speaks to their commitment to strengthening public-private partnerships in the interests of intelligence effectiveness and transparency.
And we are very fortunate indeed. We kick off the summit with an address from the leader of all U.S. intelligence agencies, DNI Clapper. And throughout the 2 days, we'll hear from acting USDI and the service intelligence chiefs. the leaders of the FBI and Department of Homeland Security, agency directors Rogers, Brennan, Cardillo, and Sapp, and others, as well as chair and ranking member of the AFCEA. You know, even with congressional hearings going on that require their presence, these senior officers, all agency directors, have agreed to appear at the summit because this is an important event, and communicating with all of you in the American public is indeed very important, especially at this time.
That is so true, Joe, and we've seen that commitment. And that is just for your plenary sessions. When we look at the tracks and the breakout sessions, they are just as substantive, and they demonstrate the same strong commitment to partnership. If you think of the plenaries as providing an overview of the state of U.S. intelligence, then think of the track sessions as more in-depth examination of specific threat, policy, and technology issues that affect not only the state of U.S. intelligence, but the partnerships that are essential to its success. So the cyber track, chaired by Terry Roberts and Sean Henry, is a series of focused discussions on very important aspects of this menacing and pervasive threat. Topics include the evolving nature of the cyber threat, remember, all unclassified, new strategies for countering threats and creating deterrence to future threats, and approaches for educating and training professionals in the use of threat intelligence to counter cyber threats.
The policy track will be chaired by Lynn Schnur and Tony Cothran, and they examine the issues that demand even stronger public-private partnerships to resolve them. That is key, the partnership to resolve these issues. Topics include new approaches for existing security and secrecy practices, managing the dual challenges of increasing threats and decreasing budgets, and the balance between national and tactical intelligence.
And finally, our innovation track, chaired by Bob Farrell and Randy Fort, examines developments in technology that may not yet, but will affect U.S. intelligence operations. We kind of think this track is well named for two reasons. One, for its approach. We're actually going to offer technology demonstrations during those sessions. And two, for its focus. We have moved beyond a discussion of information technology only. So topics for exploration include 3D printing, game-changing technologies for intelligence collection, processing, analysis, and dissemination. And then the final session, the impact of emerging technologies on intelligence, defense, economic, and political norms. We really hope that we have made your choice about which session you're going to select incredibly difficult.
Yes, that will be difficult. It's very rich, and it's right on the mark. As you can see, we have a full and very substantive agenda for the next 2 days. Agenda development and even event planning have been ongoing for the better part of a year, and there are many to thank. First and foremost, we want to thank the leadership of AFCEA International and INSA for their support. Bob and John, thank you for supporting this important event.
And we want to say a special thank you to our Summit Premier sponsors, Nobles, Northrop Grumman, and IBM. Your support means much to the success of the summit. Thank you sincerely.
The AFCEA International and INSA staffs who support this event have worked tirelessly and as a team. Thank you. Doesn't quite seem sufficient to express our gratitude to them. We single out for special recognition Steve Ritchie, AFCEA Vice President for Intelligence, Chuck Alsop, INSA's Vice President for Policy, for their unique, dedicated leadership. We also want to acknowledge the many AFCEA Intelligence Committee and INSA Council volunteer intelligence professionals who gave of their time and intellect to build a comprehensive and thought-provoking Summit 2015 agenda and speaker slate.
So before I turn the floor over to Joe to introduce the first session, we have a few administrative remarks to make, so please bear with me. I'll try to be brief and cogent. One, please do use the networking breaks to visit our exhibit hall. We have a wide array of exciting exhibits, and we know that this will be well worth your time. If you need a little extra incentive, refreshments at the break will be there. So go visit the exhibit hall. Second topic is questions. We really do want you to ask questions of the speaker. We expect it, we encourage it, and they want it. That's why they're here. So you should find on the tables or the chairs cards, index cards, on which you can write the questions. What we're asking you to do is, once you've completed a question, pass it to the end of the row you are sitting in. Either end is fine. When the person seated at the end of the row gets a question, if you could just raise your hand, please, the summit staff will come and pick them up. Please don't wait until the end of the speaker session to submit questions. As soon as you have it, write down the question, because the sooner you submit the questions, the more questions the moderators will be able to get in. Twitter. You can follow all the summit action on Twitter at #Intelligence2015. I was going to joke and read at #Intelligence15, but then you'd know how old I really am, so I'm not going to do that. After this morning's breakout sessions, you're going to find lunch in the exhibit area, another incentive to visit our exhibitors. It'll take place from 11:45 to 1 o'clock. Today's lunch is sponsored by Oracle, so thank you very much, Oracle. Need you to follow the agenda pretty carefully so that you can see the timings of the plenary sessions and the breakout sessions. So today we have 2 breakout sessions, but tomorrow we only have 1. Today we have 2 plenary sessions. Tomorrow we have 3. So please follow it. All of the plenary sessions take place in this room, so you know where you are. To get to the breakout sessions, take the escalator down 2 floors. You'll find 2 of the breakout rooms immediately at the escalator and to your right. Down that same hallway, or to your left, pardon me, look at me, to your right, yeah, to your left. Down that same hallway a little bit, you'll find the 3rd breakout room, but they are completely well marked. You won't have any problem finding it. Follow the signs to your session of interest, please. Networking session. This evening we are having a networking reception. Please plan on attending 3:45 to 5 o'clock. Great opportunity to visit exhibits, but also a really good opportunity to connect to your colleagues who are here. We want to thank General Dynamics, who is our sponsor for that event, so thank you very much. Believe it or not, that's it for the administrative remarks. I have one more remark to make, which is a final thank you to all of you for being here. We sincerely hope you find the next 2 days stimulating and informative. And now I'm going to turn it over to Joe to introduce the moderator of our first session.
Right, so we'll just kick this off, and I have the distinct honor of introducing Ambassador John Negroponte, who will be introducing our first distinguished speaker for the first event of the 2 days. Ambassador John Negroponte really needs no introduction. I mentioned he's chairman of INSA. He was the first Director of National Intelligence, Deputy Secretary of State, Deputy National Security Advisor and Ambassador to the United Nations, to Iraq, to Mexico, Honduras. I can go on to when he started in Vietnam. With great honor, I introduce Ambassador John Negroponte.
Thank you, Joe. Good morning, everybody. Delighted to see that we have such terrific attendance here. I was wondering when I first arrived whether we'd be able to fill up the room, but we've done more than that, so that's just a testimony to the importance you attach to this conference. I'd like to echo Joe's comments regarding our partnership with AFCEA. We have and continue to enjoy working with AFCEA and look forward to continuing this partnership again next year. There's no better place to begin our exploration of the state of U.S. intelligence than with an address from Director of National Intelligence James Clapper, the fourth Director of National Intelligence and the leader of all United States intelligence. Director Clapper has served in United States intelligence for over 50 years, with more than 30 of those years in uniform. He has served as the director of two national intelligence agencies, the DIA and the NGA. He's been the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, and as a private sector executive leading industry support to the intelligence community. There is no intelligence leader, past or present, with Director Clapper's depth and breadth of experience across multiple intelligence domains, and both in the private and public sector. And I say that with all due humility as the first Director of National Intelligence, and I marvel at the wisdom and experience that Jim has brought to his job, and which I believe has really enhanced the standing and the prestige of the DNI. And I think it's also important that, unlike his predecessors, he's managed to spend a good bit of time on this tour of duty, I believe more than 5 years at this point. His career and many accomplishments serve as an example of the power of both intelligence community integration and public-private partnerships. When Director Clapper completes his remarks, I will moderate a question and answer session and look forward to including many of your questions as well. So as was mentioned earlier, write them down and they will be collected from you by the conference staff. It is an honor to have Director James Clapper with us today. Please join me in welcoming him to the 2015 Intelligence and National Security Summit. Jim, thank you for coming. You're welcome.
Well, thanks. It's great to be back on the stage with this integrated AFCEA and INSA group. Spent the past 5 years preaching the gospel of intelligence integration, and it's been my major theme during my tenure as DNI. It's really the reason I think the office exists. It's what the 9/11 Commission advocated, and it's what our TPA, the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act, legislated. But perhaps my successor won't need to even talk about it. Now, this morning, seeing Mo Baginski and Joe Detrani working together almost makes me feel like, you know, intelligence integration is really catching on. By the way, Mo and Joe has a certain ring to it. Either a singing duo or selling car parts together, I'm not sure which, but. So for the rest of this speech, in the spirit of integration, I'll refer to you jointly as Mojo. I think that's appropriate because you definitely have the joint AFCEA INSA Mojo going this morning, as evidenced by this great crowd. So thank you both for the invitation to kick off this great summit and for nurturing the spirit of working together. So when I was here last year, I spoke about our then new national intelligence strategy, quite literally on the day our publication was literally rolling off the presses. Now this year we don't quite have anything as obvious like that to talk about, so I went to the summit website to read what Mojo expected me to talk about. Here's what the summit website said I'd be discussing. U.S. intelligence is an essential instrument of national power and perhaps has never been more powerful than today given advances in technology. And with great power comes great responsibility. Now that last line really struck me. With great power comes great responsibility. Apparently, Mojo think that I'm Spider-Man. In the interest of transparency, I'll tell you, of course, I'm not. I asked my staff, and they say I look a lot more like Spidey's Uncle Ben, just with less hair. But I feel like I have a personal connection to the web slinger. That line, with great power comes great responsibility, was used to introduce Spidey's first comic book appearance in 1962. And in the spring of 1963, just as I was starting off in the Intel business, Marvel published the first issue of the Amazing Spider-Man. Coincidence? Yes. All kidding aside, the IC has a lot in common with Spider-Man. We constantly have to worry about covert concerns, someone matching our secret identities to our everyday normal lives. Both Spider-Man and his alter ego Peter Parker are known for their genius-level intellect, and we in the IC are known for our geniuses in subjects ranging from mathematics and cryptology to denial and deception, and even rocket science. Spider-Man is known for his superhuman strength. Now, a couple days a week, I lift weights in our office gym, and my spotter says I'm pretty strong for a geezer. Of course, my spotter is normally one of my detail guys, so his evaluation of my weight room prowess may be just a little bit biased. Spider-Man is known for his precognitive spidey sense. Many of our customers expect us to be clairvoyant when it comes to world events. Spidey is known as the web slinger because he shoots spider webs from devices on his wrists. Some of the bad guys derisively call him Webhead. More and more, we in the IC are focused on cyber intelligence and the World Wide Web. Okay, I'll grant you that's a stretch. There are even similarities between Superman and the IC when it comes to governance. Stan Lee and Marvel created Spider-Man and still publish Spidey comics. But Sony Pictures has creative control of Spidey on film. Similarly, every IC agency and element, other than CI and ODNI, are in someone else's cabinet department. And so integrating priorities and resources across the IC is not easy, particularly when it comes to following the different laws, rules, and processes that reside in each one of those cabinet departments. And while we're listing similarities, don't forget Sony Pictures and I both had a less than friendly interaction with North Korea. By the way, every Spidey fan here is hoping Marvel and Sony can successfully integrate efforts to give the web slinger an awesome role in Captain America: Civil War. So we in the IC have a lot in common, at least superficially, with the character who is arguably Marvel Comics' most popular. But I'll set aside those comparisons for a few minutes because those few sentences on the AFCEA INSA Summit website, the ones posted just under my picture, make a really good point. Intelligence is a powerful and essential tool for our national security enterprise. And again, with great power comes great responsibility. Those statements have been true as long as I can remember, and I can remember back a long way. My dad was in the SIGINT business in World War II, and as a consequence of traveling around the globe with him, I grew up on intelligence sites and in antenna farms all over the world. Now, of course, back then, we didn't talk about intelligence publicly. 5 decades later, that's, of course, changed. In fact, that's changed a lot just over the past 3 years. I admit, because of my experience growing up in the SIGINT business and my 5 decades or so in Intel, that the kind of transparency we're engaged in now almost is genetically antithetical to me. And I think, as I think back, which I want to do these days, Air Force Second Lieutenant Jim Clapper in 1963 would be shocked by the level of detail that we talk about SIGINT, and specifically in intelligence activities in general, in 2015. And that's been one of my major takeaways the past few years. Yes, we have to protect our secrets, our sources and methods, our tradecraft. But we have to be more transparent about the things that we can talk about. Because now the American public expects us to talk about how we're using the power of U.S. intelligence responsibly. And, again, with great power comes great responsibility. That's a lesson I personally believe we didn't learn quickly enough, and that we certainly includes me. So that's why more and more we're discussing our work to correct misunderstandings and to try to help people grasp what we do, to show that we're worthy of America's trust, and to prove that we make worthwhile contributions to the security of Americans and our friends and allies around the world. It's why over the past 2 years, the community has declassified more than 5,000 pages of documents about our work, and importantly about the oversight of our work, that which is conducted by all 3 branches of the government. And by publishing these declassified documents on our Tumblr site, IC on the Record, and pushing them out on Facebook and Twitter, they've reached millions of people in the U.S. and around the world. And that includes, of course, our adversaries, who also have learned a lot from our transparency. But I think we've come down on the side of transparency is worth that cost. We declassified these documents to show that we follow the law, and when we do make mistakes, we do our best to live up to that line Stan Lee wrote just a few months before I joined the intelligence business: with great power comes great responsibility. We understand the truth in that line. It's why the President challenged us in his speech in January of last year to formalize privacy protections for our signals intelligence efforts at home and abroad, and to be more transparent about how we implement those protections. This past January, we published a comprehensive report answering the challenges the President publicly gave us in 2014. We also supported the USA Freedom Act, which authorizes increased reporting of how the IC exercises some of its authorities. And this past February, we published the Principles of Intelligence Transparency, and we stood up an IC transparency working group with senior representatives from all over the IC. And their purpose is to, and I meet with these great people, to transform these principles into action. And I want to talk about those four transparency principles just for a moment. They're fairly simple. 1, provide appropriate transparency to enhance public understanding of the intelligence community. That principle says what we ought to be transparent about and why. 2, be proactive and clear in making information publicly available, of course, when we can. And that gets into how we should be transparent. 3, protect information about intelligence sources, methods, and activities. And 4, align IC roles, resources, processes, and policies to support transparency implementation. So the tenets 3 and 4 essentially say that protecting our tradecraft, our sources, methods, and activities is an individual responsibility for each person who holds a security clearance, while transparency is an institutional responsibility for the IC as an enterprise. If a member of the intelligence community, blue badge or green badge, comes across information she thinks we should make public, we have processes in place already to review it for declassification. And if someone comes across something she thinks we're doing wrong, we have lots of avenues to report that activity, including legitimate avenues for whistleblowing. To make sure our workforce knows their rights and responsibilities on these issues, we've been publicizing how to recommend something for declassification, how to properly blow a whistle, and what their protections are if they do so. We're also increasingly reaching out to the American public. As our Transparency Principle 2 says, we need to be proactive and clear with transparency, because we're trying to help the public understand what we do in their name. It's why we as an IC have declassified and published so many significant documents. that Tumblr selected RIC on the record site for their 2014 end-of-year review. That's a big reason why this spring we sent our National Intelligence Council to the South by Southwest Festival to engage the diverse group of people there and get them to help us identify themes to include in our next Global Trends report. It's also why this summer we published a huge tranche of documents we'd collected during the 2012 Abbottabad raid, probably later than we should, but we've got to it. And by the way, our publication of Bin Laden's bookshelf, it gave us about as much web traffic in just 2 days, 750,000 site visits, and 2 million page views, as our website received in all of 2013 and 2014 put together. And if you ran a Google search for Bin Laden, DNI.gov was the #2 search result behind only Wikipedia. And tomorrow, in the name of transparency, I'll be on the Hill once again in an open hearing testifying on cyber threats and cyber intelligence. Of course, transparency can help us with mission 2, particularly when we're able to use imagery publicly. In 2013, we showed how Syria had used chemical weapons on its own people. In 2014, we helped make public a diplomatic case against Russia for obfuscating what happened to Malaysia Airlines Flight 17. We also shared imagery to help people in need. As we passed the anniversary of Hurricane Katrina a couple weeks ago, I found myself thinking about the work NGA did back when I was director. In the aftermath of the hurricane, Admiral Thad Allen, then Commandant of the Coast Guard, reached out to NGA for help in figuring out what precisely the storm had done to New Orleans and to the state of Louisiana and the state of Mississippi. How it had decimated so much property and rerouted the waterways and blocked the ports. In general, helping him with situational awareness to manage the response to this disaster. And the Coast Guard and NGA ended up working very closely together. And in the process, I got to know Thad Allen pretty well. And I consider him both a personal hero and a close friend. This spring, my wife Sue and I had dinner with Thad and his wife Pam. And as old war horses are wont to do, we reminisced and told war stories. And I found out that among the few mementos that Thad and Pam display in their home is a topographical three-dimensional map of New Orleans given to him by NGA when he retired. And he recalled fondly the superb work NGA did after Hurricane Rita and Katrina, as well as in the aftermath of the BP oil spill. That was all work that mattered, that directly made a difference to American citizens. And the people who were on the ground remember it. And as we push forward transparency initiatives, we've been able to help with tragedies and natural disasters around the world. Last summer and fall, the IC and NGA had a huge and largely unsung impact on the control and containment of Ebola in West Africa by providing open data on human geography to the countries and NGOs that were involved. And for the first time ever, setting up a publicly available website for disaster support. And this spring, NGA and the IC put the lessons we learned from the Ebola outbreak into action after the earthquake in Nepal, producing damage assessments, reporting on the operating status of airfields, providing estimates on internally displaced people, and displaying studies of transportation routes. We save lives and set a community on the other side of the world on the road to recovery. And those are things the intelligence community has done that I'm pretty proud of. Once we made a commitment to be transparent, doing these things, helping people in need, were easy decisions, easy commitments to make. And I think going forward, we're going to have to be more transparent in talking about hard decisions and difficult choices, because we're in a difficult business in a challenging time. So this morning, I started my speech with a comparison of superficial similarities between the IC and Spider-Man. I think there's one other thing that the intelligence community has in common with Spidey, and more directly and more distinctly with Peter Parker. This gets to the heart of why Spider-Man has been one of Marvel's most popular characters since the first issue of the Amazing Spider-Man. 52 years ago, the same year I started in Intel, before Spidey, most comic books primarily depicted the external struggle between the superhero and the supervillain. It was Superman versus Lex Luthor with kryptonite. With Peter Parker, for the first time, comic readers saw a hero's inner struggles. They shared his experiences of trying to keep the job and earn enough to survive, trying to talk to girls, and watching helplessly as a loved one, his Uncle Ben, dies. And more than anything else, Peter struggled with deciding what to do when his principles, his personal values, came in conflict with each other. That's what made Spider-Man such an interesting character to follow. People have always related to his inner struggle with decisions. Peter found that sometimes he couldn't keep a promise to a friend, and at the same time, as Spider-Man, help someone in need. The intelligence community is composed of people who similarly face tough choices. I think this often gets lost in the public discussion. We as an institution and as a workforce have principles and values that sometimes come into conflict. Things like our need to keep sources and methods secret and our desire to be more open and transparent with what we do. Things like pursuing terrorists and others who want to do us harm, and protecting the privacy and civil liberties of the typical citizens, not just of this country, but of the world, who are rarely but sometimes caught up in our collection efforts against the bad guys. And solutions for these conflicts are not always obvious. I've been in meetings in which we literally pulled out our copies of the Constitution and Bill of Rights to get to the ground truth of what our principles and obligations are. Wrestling with constitutional issues to make difficult decisions is part of our daily business. And it's just a fragment of what makes an IC career so unique. This is a difficult business. I've been in this job, as John mentioned, a little over 5 years, and every day I realize that fact a little more. I've been pondering a lot about how to best express my feelings on my career and this job. And just last week, I came across an email that captured them and expressed them better than I could ever have done. And it was something that FBI Director Jim Comey, one of our great leaders in all of government, sent out to his staff. And I want to share his thoughts. He wrote, "I've been thinking about humility lately. One of my weaknesses has long been overconfidence. I don't know whether it was the product of nature or nurture, but from an early age, I had a tendency to reach a conclusion quickly, hold to it firmly, and argue about it until the sun went down. Fortunately, a whole lot of life experience has helped beat that out of me. In fact, the older I get, the less I know for absolute certain, and the more I realize my own ability to see clearly and to reason well is limited. That's one of the reasons it is so important to have people around me who see the world differently and who will tell me what they see and conclude so that together we can make better decisions." Jim Comey's email absolutely nails what I have been thinking about and pondering of late. There is a human aspect to intelligence work that gets lost in the public discussion. We're human, and when we forget that, when we're utterly certain about everything, when we stop questioning and stop listening to the people around us who see the world differently, we're more likely to make mistakes and poor decisions. And that's what it means to be human. Fans of the Amazing Spider-Man love Peter Parker because we can relate to his humanity. He struggles, he tries his best, he makes mistakes, he learns from them, and he keeps going. And he constantly tries to live up to the line that became his creed. With great power comes great responsibility. That line so succinctly describes what the people in the intelligence community try to live up to every day. To show that we're worthy of America's trust and that we're worthwhile because, spoiler alert, we're not comic book characters. We're Americans working to protect our nation and at the same time striving to live up to to our nation's values. So, thanks again, Mojo, for inviting me to kick off the summit. And thanks to everyone here this morning for listening and for being here in the spirit of integration to map out where our community goes next. So thank you very much. Make any difference?
Thanks very much, Jim. That email from Jim Comey goes all the way back to Socrates, doesn't it? All I know is that I know nothing. And I guess that's the ultimate wisdom. Before I go to questions from the participants, I had a couple of my own that I'd like to ask, just two. And I don't think they're curveballs in any way. The first, because I know it's a subject of great interest to everybody here, is the intelligence budget. And I know you're not, you don't have a crystal ball, but I think we'd be very interested in hearing what you might have to say, what observations you might have to say about the status of the intelligence budget and what the prospects are for it in the months or years. Years is perhaps saying much, but as far out as you feel you can comfortably see in that regard. But what's your view on that?
Well, I guess if I had to pick one word to characterize the budget environment, the budget situation for intelligence, which is a microcosm of the rest of the government, I would characterize it as one of uncertainty. We are potentially facing the specter in 2016, depending on what happens on the Hill, of another year of sequestration. This afternoon, coincidentally, I'll be meeting with what we call the small XCOM, which are essentially the big six, on teeing up 2017. We're having a worry now about that budget year. And once again, as we look forward to 2017, we are again going to be confronted with putting together a budget with great uncertainty about its fate in the Congress. The BCA, the budget caps, Budget Control Act still apply. In fact, that law still runs till the year 2021. So we're going to be in this mode of not knowing what our funding level is ultimately going to be, and living from year to year in this uncertain context, which makes planning very, very difficult. We have 30 or so major systems acquisitions to manage across the IC, most of those in the NRO. And it plays havoc when you don't know what the budget situation is going to be. And of course, it has huge impact on our most valuable asset, which is our workforce. And that uncertainty, the lingering uncertainty now, stretching into 4 years, is having impact on the workforce, and that is evidenced in our latest IC climate survey. And so it is a very daunting thing, a challenging thing to manage in this kind of environment. I will say that I believe my office, ODNI, has kind of been put to the litmus test here during these 4 years of uncertainty and reduction. In the decade or so after 9/11, every year the intelligence community got more money and more people, which really wasn't all that hard to manage, and we're in a much different mode now. And I like to think ODNI has kind of earned its keep by managing in a cut environment where we invest and where we take cuts. And of course, through all of that has been the number one precept that I've stuck to for 5 years now, which is the first priority is to try to protect the workforce.
Thank you for that. My second question, Jim, goes to the Iran agreement, and basically to ask you if you care to offer some comments on the verifiability of the agreement.
And that is, pretty much where the lane I've tried to stick to and the IC's tried to stick to is our ability to monitor compliance with this agreement, assuming it comes off. And we were required within 5 days after the agreement was struck to submit to the Congress a very detailed assessment of our both capabilities, what we could do, and where we had lesser capabilities to monitor the agreement. So I come away with pretty confident, I won't say 100%, I should never say that, but pretty confident that we can, in fact, verify through our own sources what the international community will be able to, through the mechanism, the IAEA, and its very intrusive, in fact, unprecedented access and ability to observe and monitor what the Iranians are doing. So I'm pretty confident in that. We are fielding some independent capabilities, which I can't obviously go into, despite all my protestations about transparency, that will enable us, I think, to have good insight into the nuclear industrial enterprise of Iran, if I can call it that. And I guess, writ large, if you ask me, would I, given a choice between a state sponsor of terrorism with a nuclear capability or a state sponsor of terrorism without it, I'd probably pick the latter.
Yes, sir. Okay, so if we could perhaps go to some of the questions that have been submitted from the audience, and the first one reads, and this really goes to the human resource issue of the IC as a whole. What will the IC workforce of the future look like in your view? How are we thinking about policies and processes for recruiting, retention, et cetera? And I would just add just a parenthesis to that, which is, are we getting, how's recruitment going? Are we getting the people we want?
Well, I will tell you that since 9/11, we have brought on a tremendous cadre of people in the intelligence community. I just got back from a 10-day, 7-stop death march in North Africa and East Africa, and wherever I went, it is literally eye-watering to see what our intelligence community people are doing. And the vast majority of these men and women have come on since 9/11. For me, a rather profound sociological change in the community, in that thousands of civilian employees in the intelligence community have deployed to war zones multiple times since 9/11. That has had huge impact on the identification of mission in our workforce. And it continues to attract great young people to the intelligence community. My war, Southeast Asia, I went to Vietnam in 1965, and you hardly ever saw a civilian employee or a civilian contractor. They just weren't there. And that is very, very different today, and that has had huge impact on the community. I remember when I left NGA in 2006, I was there almost 5 years, and one statistic I recall, it was quoted to me, was 60% of the workforce had been hired during the 5 years I was there. And that's not unusual. That is across the board. We had last fall 31 vacancies in NCTC and got 6,000 applicants.
Jeez.
So we do continue to attract. I will also tell you that our attrition rate is pretty low. It runs around 4% and has, plus or minus a tenth of a percent at least during the 5 years I've been DNI. As to your question, what is it, or what's the workforce going to be like? Well, I think one thing that I've noticed is what the workforce desires is, particularly the younger people, is mobility. And we need to be able to facilitate the ability of our young people to come to the community and then go to industry, get refreshed technologically, and then come back to the community. And we need to figure out a way to facilitate that. So I think what I find is what they're interested in is what's the technological challenge, where can I go to broaden my professional horizons? And they're not too concerned with sticking with one institution for a 30-year lifetime career. That's a big difference from my day when I first got into this business.
Thank you for that. This is a somewhat related question. Many have suggested that the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act, IRTPA, and the ODNI are like Goldwater Nichols was for the DOD. So how do you think the IC's journey is going 10 years into this reform?
Well, I think, again, being kind of the unit historian, I think, we operate better as an enterprise, as a community than we did 10 years ago. I mean, we had 9/11, so let's reorganize. And, we can argue till the cows come home whether that was really necessary or needed, but it doesn't matter. It's the law. It's what the 9/11 Commission decided was needed, and that found its way into the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act. We have a unique arrangement in this country for an intelligence community that's really not, although many countries I find now are trying to emulate it, it's not quite like ours. It's not like Goldwater Nichols because Goldwater Nichols applied to one cabinet department. And the IC is an amalgam of 17 organizations that cut across 6 cabinet departments and 2 independent agencies. Perhaps the spirit of Goldwater Nichols applies, and we've tried to do that, particularly with joint duty. And we're approaching somewhere in the neighborhood of 12,000 employees that have qualified for joint duty, many of them in deployed status. So I think we've made progress. We operate better as an enterprise, as a community. That's not to say there aren't friction points and there aren't issues and problems that we still wrestle with, and we'll continue to do that. And I suspect my successor will continue to promote integration. Certainly in the spirit of Goldwater Nichols, if not the exact letter of it.
Yeah, if I could just add a comment of my own on that. I was not involved in the reform process. I was serving as ambassador to Iraq at the time, and actually the first time I read the legislation was when the president asked me to be the first director. But it seems to me, whatever the merits or demerits, one has to accept things as they are. That legislation was passed, and I think the idea of trying to reform the intelligence community again, at least in any significant way, would be opening up a can of worms. So I think the best thing is to try to make what we've got work. Vice President Cheney used to talk to me about maybe at some point you might have some perfecting amendments, he called to suggest, but I'm not even sure that we want to do that. Perhaps what we want to do is make sure that we make the improvements we can within existing legal authorities. Here's a question about the Snowden affair. Can you give a capsule summary of how the Snowden issue has affected our IC operations? I guess not to mention our diplomacy.
Well, on the one hand, obviously it forced some needed transparency, particularly on those programs that affected civil liberties and privacy in this country. And had that been all he had done, that I probably could have understood it better or maybe even tolerated it. But he exposed so many other things that had nothing to do with so-called domestic surveillance or civil liberties and privacy in this country. He has done untold damage to our foreign collection and analysis capabilities. Terrorists, particularly, have gone to school on the revelations caused by Snowden. A particular program in Afghanistan that he exposed, which Glenn Greenwald wrote about, and the day after he wrote about it, the program was shut down by the government of Afghanistan, which was the single most important source of force protection warning for our people in Afghanistan. So he's done huge damage to our collection capabilities, make no mistake about it.
Boy, that's very, very interesting. And troubling, of course. Here's a question I had wanted to ask you. As a leader who has uniquely observed major world events and the effects of those world events in over the past years, what are your concerns with the mass Syrian refugee situation on the different countries throughout Europe, economically, national security-wise, culturally, et cetera? And I guess I just would, to add something to that would be how do we know what kind of people are going to Europe in this refugee flow?
Well, it is, getting to be in its totality, a disaster of biblical proportions. If just look at Syria alone, where there are in excess of 4 million people that have left Syria and another 11 million that have been internally displaced. And of course, humanitarian situation internal to Syria is a disaster. And so what this has caused, obviously, is this urge to go somewhere, anywhere, where there's some hope of their life improving. And of course, as they descend on Europe, one of the obvious issues that we worry about, and in turn, as we bring refugees to this country, is exactly what their background. We don't obviously put it past the likes of ISIL to infiltrate operatives among these refugees. So that is a huge concern of ours. We do have a pretty aggressive program for those coming to this country for screening their backgrounds. I am not as uniformly confident as about each European country that is going to be faced with welcoming or allowing refugees into their country. So this is a huge issue for all kinds of reasons. The security implications are just one small part of it, but the economic, the social impacts are huge.
Yeah, and it's really captured global attention. I mean, it's on the front page every single day, and I suspect it will be for quite a while to come. Here's a question about Russia. The resurgence of Russian military power is not just playing out in Eastern Europe, but also in places such as the Arctic, with 1/4 of the world's oil reserves, future transpolar shipping, and concern on climate change. Do we have a greater need to balance our national interests above the Arctic Circle?
First point I think is just a general statement about Russia and its very aggressive and, for me, very concerning military modernization is of great concern. In some ways, it's almost a throwback to the era of the Cold War. And the challenge we have in intelligence is we do not have nearly the resources that we did in the heyday of the Cold War to allocate against watching what is becoming a very formidable adversary. Manifestation of that, of course, is their aggressiveness in the Arctic, and they have, which of course underlying that are their own concerns and interests and claims for oil resources in the Arctic shelf. And so they have set about a very aggressive campaign to either reactivate and refurbish bases in the Arctic region or build new ones. And it's very clear they are quite serious about a stake in the Arctic. And I think, you know, the President's visit to Alaska was intended to, I think, attract attention to this, why the Arctic is important to the United States. And speaking of climate change, you know, as controversial as that is with some people, the impacts of climate change are having and will continue to have huge national security implications around the world. It already is. With you know, the changes in climate, changes in weather, and how that affects crops and the availability of water, which is getting to be, in many cases, a great point of friction between and among certain countries.
Here's a perennial. The background investigation and security clearance process and system. These are pretty strong words coming here. Inefficient, wasteful, and obsolete. With the revelations about the OPM data breach, we now know that the system is corrupt, therefore untrustworthy. What are you doing to reform and reshape the background investigation and clearance process to bring it into the 21st century?
Well, what we're attempting to do, which of course now is because of all the challenges with OPM before the breach, but what we're trying to do is go to a system of continuous evaluation, which would mean monitoring, at least on a minimal basis, employees who have, once they're granted a clearance, to detect anomalous behavior either in the workplace or outside the workplace that could then prompt or stimulate a deeper investigation, as opposed to the system we've had, which goes back, you know, the Cold War era of an initial clearance, and then allegedly every 5 years you get a periodic reinvestigation, a system which is broken, and made all the more so by the challenges that OPM had with its contractor, its prime contractor, before the revelation of the breaches. So the combination of what we're doing, that we've been told to do, mandated to do, both by the Hill and the White House, to enhance insider threat detection. And as we morph to a system of continuous evaluation, I think, you know, that'll change the system. What that hopefully will do is allow more mobility between and among IC components and between IC components and contractors than has been the case in the past. The other thing that I've been kind of on the warpath about is just reducing the number of clearances that are granted, because if you have a clearance and no one there's hundreds of thousands of cases of this where people have clearances but don't need or have the access. That imposes a huge burden on the investigatory system. So one way we can we help ourselves, and this is primarily through the efforts of DOD, is just to reduce the need for clearances. So DOD is we've reduced somewhere in the neighborhood of 600,000 or 700,000 clearance requirements. which in turn, of course, lightens the load somewhat on the old system. But you're right, the system we have now doesn't work, and I think the only hope here is, which is where we're going, is a system of continuous evaluation, which will depend heavily on automation, particularly at the secret level. We're going to probably do all of that on an automated basis unless something kicks up that cues us that, hey, we need to go look at this person in a little more depth.
Interesting. Trusted traveler sort of approach to things. What is your advice to recent graduates, ex-military, students, and young professionals seeking to enter the field of intelligence with cutbacks in government and the prerequisite of active security clearances, here we are again, in the private sector?
Well, now that I've, in my geezer era, I guess, I've spent a good bit of time engaging individually with young people, in college and coming out of college. And so a couple things I tell them is, I know many of them will set their goal or their target on, I want to go to work for agency X. And my advice to them is apply to all of them. There's interesting, challenging work in any one of the intelligence components. If you get on with one of them, then you worry about where you want to end up later. You may find your second choice is not bad. And if you cannot get on with the government, then seek employment with contractors who work for the intelligence community. So there are many avenues. Now, at the same time, as I indicated earlier, our attrition rate is not all that high, and people do stay, and the prospects, frankly, given our budget situation and the life of the Budget Control Act through 2021, there aren't going to be a whole lot of openings. That's not to say there won't be some, there are, but so the one thing I try to impart to people, young people, and many of them are, they're not good at that, is patience. To be patient and persevering. Here comes the ringer.
Okay, here it is. The audience in front of you today is about 75% private sector. And the private sector builds capabilities for the IC. It provides critical services and is the source of critical innovation. How would you assess the state of the IC's public-private partnership, and how could it be improved?
Well, I think it's, it's pretty good. Certainly could always be better. I think one of the challenges, that's something I really tried to work when I was NGA director after I'd spent 6 years in the industry, was to come up with a mechanism or mechanisms whereby we as, and I'm speaking we as NGA, would be more open to contractors, particularly those who didn't have SCI facilities or clearances, just for the sake of getting their technology. One of the things I've pushed as ODNI is to try to lay out a technology roadmap. What are the needs and requirements of the intelligence community, and present that as best we can to industry, to engage industry and our helping us. Industry is absolutely crucial to the continued viability and success of the intelligence community. We have to have what you make, the tools that you give us, and the technology. And so it's never nirvana. It's not what everyone would like, just because of, to a certain extent, the nature of our business. It's classified, it's secret, and all that, and the nature of the rules that we have to live with. But within that, my, at least philosophically, philosophical bent is to try to open up the lines of communication and be open with industry as we can be.
So perhaps two more questions, if that's okay with you. The first would be, how can we actively encourage innovation horizontally across the IC without using infrastructure or organizational reshuffle as a placebo for change, I guess?
Well, one way, I guess there are many, but I'll just, in the interest of brevity, I'll just say I think one thing that helps that is facilitating moving people around within the IC. I think that where you bring the ideas of your home organization to another organization, and I have found just in my own experience, just at ODNI, where 40% of our workforce are detailees from the rest of the community, that constant infusion of new ideas from other places is helpful. I also think that, and this of course applies to the parts of the IC that have heavy military populations, like DIA and NSA, for example, that the infusion of military people who are transients by definition, who served other places, particularly in the war zone, and they come to the agencies, and I've found these young, particularly young soldiers, sailors, and Marines are tremendous drivers for change and innovation, particularly if they have served in the war zones.
And well, with due respect, there's still a number of questions here that I have, and I'm sorry we weren't able to get to all of them, but maybe one final question, Jim. We face a plethora of threats most of us never imagined. An evolving ambitious China, a resurgent Russia, daily cyber catastrophes, and some of them do seem like catastrophes to me, and a disintegrating Middle East, to name a few. How prepared are we to understand these threats, and what initiatives or innovations do we need to undertake to be better prepared?
Well, I think the line I've used in testimony on the Hill every year I've been in this job is that, and I just repeat it and add a year, is to say that in my X number of years, I don't recall a time when we've been beset by more challenges and crises than and a greater diversity of them than we do today. And so what I've tried to protect in terms of our capability is global coverage, which means a couple things, at least to me. One is sustaining our bases and stations around the world that the CIA is host for what are increasingly becoming IC cells. And so, and by the way, where we here in the Beltway like to agonize and hyperventilate over whether we're integrated or not, when you go out to the field, and I just had a reminder of that in this my last trip, there's no question about integration and operating as a team because it's just good business. When I first started traveling in this job, I thought when I had IC town halls at embassies around the world, I needed to, roll out my sermonette about integration. I stopped doing that because it's just not necessary anymore. In fact, I would submit parenthetically that what CIA is doing in its reorganization is saluting what already goes on in the field internally as they are integrating into a series of mission centers. So I think that's that global coverage around the world is one very important dimension, so that we cannot possibly predict every single crisis and challenge we're going to have. So we have to be positioned where we can observe, collect, and understand what's going on. The other piece of global coverage, in my mind, is to sustain a robust overhead collection architecture, particularly for access to denied areas. So those two capabilities, and of course, particularly in the latter case, trying to push innovation and stretching the technological envelope, if you will, are the areas where I put a lot of emphasis.
Thank you very much for this wide-ranging discussion, which resulted from these questions. I understand, Director Clapper, that you have, that before we conclude this session, that you have announcement for...
Well, I just, thanks, John. It's more in the nature of a commercial. First,
Okay.
thanks for having me, and to kick this off. And I did want to announce at 9:45 that Bill Avenida, who is the National Counterintelligence Executive and also the now Director of, as we call it, the National Counterintelligence Security Center, will be here to roll out a counterintelligence seminar, awareness seminar, prompted at least in part by OPM breaches. So 9:45 for Bill Avenida. So thanks for that.
So let's give Director Clapper, let's express our appreciation to him for the... Thank you.